Yeah. Baked and blessed.
All right. Welcome everyone to Baked and Blessed. This is our Cannabis State of Affairs virtual panel. I really do appreciate our esteemed panelists for attending. Hi, everyone in the room. Why don't we just give a round of introduction, starting with my top left and Laura Boyson. How you doing, Chuck?
Hi, I'm Laura from Cannabis Gang, and this is my husband, Chuck, and I run an online cannabis mom group and forum, and we have just, keeping everyone just advocacy for moms who use cannabis and getting us out there and.
And I'm Chuck. I'm a family physician. I have actually a lot of experience in treating all age groups, but also in some community issues and some administrative issues at hospitals too. And I have a special interest in cannabis and have for quite some time.
So we're happy to be here.
All right. Thank you so much for joining. And at my bottom left, Paula Sardinas, please let us know who you are.
Paula Sardinas, President and CEO of FMS Global Strategies and the Washington Build Back Black Alliance. We've been advocating for cannabis in many areas, not just public policy, but on sentencing disparities. Since 1996, we're originally from Jacksonville, Florida, but we are blessed to be able to have done this policy in about 7 states and on the federal level. We brought you Senate Bill 5928 back in 2017, which helped with cannabis banking here after the rescission of the Cole memo. So we don't just do social equity policy, we also do cannabis banking. Lovely to see many of you. I know a lot of you. Thank you, Lauren, Chuck, for your good work. It reminds me of Charlotte's Web, which was an issue that we worked on.
Finally, we have, well, not finally, but we have Caitlin Ryan in the building from the Cannabis Alliance, who graciously sponsored, there we go, who graciously sponsored this event. Please give us introduction and let us know what you do.
Thanks, Lotta. My name is Caitlin Ryan. I'm the Executive Director for the Cannabis Alliance. We're the largest industry association, and we are dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry. We advocate for businesses and licensees, as well as lots of community engagement. We focus on things like sustainability, equity, and justice, and community engagement around education.
And we have Joy Hollingsworth in the building. Please let us know what's going on and who you are.
Hi, Lotta. Hey, it's good to see you again. Good afternoon. My name is Joy Hollingsworth. I'm the co-founder of Hollingsworth Cannabis Company. And also the owner of Hollingsworth Hemp Company. We are a tier 3 producer processor located in Shelton, Washington. And we started the company back in 2012. My brother's been in the industry when he started during the medical days in Seattle back in 2006 and 2007. Third generation Seattleite, and super happy to be here and can't wait to talk to everyone and seeing familiar faces on the camera as well. Always good to see everybody. Thank you.
I think the most important part about Baked and Blessed for me is educating the community on what's going on currently with cannabis, right? And it's not just on a local, but a national level. And it happens quickly in this industry. So we think we know what's happening, and then one legislation change or one regulation change, and it's a whole new industry the next day, the next week. So let's dive into this with question 1. And we're going to go in the order of introductions for this one. And we might have covered it, but what inspired you to get involved in the cannabis space and advocacy work, and what drives your passion for the industry?
I was on Instagram and just kind of, making friends and finding other cannabis using moms. And we kind of realized we didn't have a space that was collectively ours for everyone to kind of grow. And it was more like there was a lot of single, kind of account with like, cannabis using moms advocating, but I wanted to create a space where everyone kind of felt belonged and stuff. And so our account is private, and now we have 26 chapters, and we have over 7,000 moms. And that, the best part for me is when I hear that other moms that met through Cannabis Gang and they met in person and they form real life friendships, because it's really isolating at home as a mom. and during the day, because it's just isolating. And then you create those friendships, but a lot of times when you use cannabis, you have to like keep that part secret, because you have to like feel people out to see whether or not they're going to judge you for it. But I wanted a space where people could know they could come in and everyone there was a cannabis consumer just like them, and they weren't going to be judged. So it was a place where they could, come be themselves and then find some friends.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Chuck?
I agree with Laura. Cannabis Gang is a space where it allows for a space for dialogue and allows for education about cannabis. And that has to expand, not only to moms, there's a lot of people just looking for information about it too. It helps normalize something, helps also normalize how you talk to your kids about it. Also, there's so much happening in cannabis now, on the medical side of it, which is where I'm more interested in, that there's a lot to be learned. And we need to go back and really start that dialogue and share some information we have. And there's even research out there that needs to be shared and talked about publicly, so people know there's a lot to this medicine. There's a lot to it. So it's creating a space for that dialogue.
All right. Paula?
Hey, Lotta. I mean, I think my story is probably not unlike most, African-American people. And most people know my story. I mean, you can find it on the internet. In 1996, my brother and 9 of his really good close friends were facing sentences anywhere from 25 years to life. I think the youngest one was 18 at the time, and was sentenced to 118 years for trafficking in marijuana and cocaine in Jacksonville, Florida. They were working for a notorious drug dealer by the name of Henry Mann, and these were inner city kids living in the poorest, blackest area of Jacksonville. It's actually the area where they just had the mass shooting, because my mother still lives there today. And they thought their way out of poverty was to sell drugs. I mean, that was what they were facing. And so I got involved because the sentencing disparities were ridiculous. If you were white and selling powder cocaine, you got relatively a light sentence, but you had these young African-American teenagers that were being sentenced to just a ridiculous amount of time. And so I spent probably about 20 something years getting all 10 of those guys out of prison. They're all free today. But they've all served on average about 25 years. And so working with everybody from Cory Booker to Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, even George Bush at the time, trying to figure out from that side of it, how could we deschedule marijuana and make this not the big scary boogeyman, something that was basically an herbal plant. People should not be giving up their livelihood, especially in the South, for it. And then looking at if we declassified it, I mean, imagine my brother, who got out of prison in 2021, left prison to see something that's being sold on the corners, right? It's legalized today.
Yep.
And so, our goal was to make sure that nobody in any state would still be incarcerated for selling marijuana, and that nobody would be able to give up their life for it. And so we advocate for better sentencing disparities under marijuana. So that's how I got involved in it, trying to free my brother and those African-American men that gave up their life because of this product.
I love to hear it. We need more people like you. Caitlin?
Yeah, and thank you, Paula. I think a lot of us here are, because we have had the belief that by entering into a regulated market, we could right some of these wrongs, as well as build a new marketplace to show everybody else what could be possible, and attending to things like economic justice, and a new kind of growth where there can be profits along with ethical behavior. And that's a fight we're still in. We are still in prohibition. There's a lot to do as we try and move towards that. But I still believe that there's opportunity here to do something differently from the way America has done commerce in the past. And that's why I got in, and that's why I'm still here.
I guess I'll go.
Yeah.
3 things. My mother used it for back pain. She has really bad scoliosis, and we saw how cannabis helped alleviate that pain. My uncle replaced 3 prescription drugs. He was paralyzed from the neck down. And my grandma, at the beautiful age of 92, we started giving her cannabis so she would have an appetite and start eating and just alleviate a lot of the pain that she was going through. And she lived all the way to be 101. And in 2012, 3 things hit in the state of Washington. Barack Obama was reelected, legalization of gay marriage, and then I-502 hit. And those 3 things we saw in Seattle, wanted to, as we were in the medical field, wanted to make that transition. My brother was actually growing plants in one of our basements. and wanted to transition growing 300 plants to 10,000 plants. And the representation that mattered just in the state of Washington for people to be able to see a Black family grow, whether it's a mom, a dad, a brother, an aunt, an uncle, a grandma, like a whole nine, a family that wanted to try to create generational wealth and participate in this industry, we thought was really, really important, just because of all of the damaging pieces that cannabis has brought to a community with the war on drugs, the separation of the nuclear family, all the health disparities, pulling people out of their homes, home ownership, all these different things. And so we wanted to participate in that, which I thought was really important since 2012 to do it on a legal, a phase. And that was really our biggest thing, to be able to use our platform to show people how they can do it in the industry, actually touching the plant, and that they could get involved in some capacity, whether it's touching the plant, ancillary business, technology, so many different ways in which you don't also have to touch the plant. You can get in the industry, whether it's advocacy or anything. That was really our biggest piece to jumping off a cliff and building a plane on the way down.
Right. Well, thank you all for doing that. A little round of applause. And I'll dive into the next question. With more and more states decriminalizing cannabis, how are legislative efforts locally and nationally evolving to reflect changing attitudes towards cannabis? And then additionally, how do you feel about multi-state operators and the potential impact they may have on the Washington cannabis industry?
Well, I think, we've got some amazing people on this panel too. And while some of the laws are changing, I think we're way, way, way behind. I think there are so many legal misgivings that have happened historically to so many people that if we don't start righting those wrongs immediately, it doesn't matter. We're creating this industry in a space where so many people have been harmed by it, that if we don't start and really commit to fixing that first, it's going to tarnish. I just think it's going to tarnish the industry. So it's like we have to really correct the wrongs that have been done and really develop this. I think like Joy, like your family is developing. That's a family-owned business. That's beautiful. That's the way great companies are developed. That's the way we need to create this. So we have to be very careful. I think a lot of the legislation is creating space, not only to decriminalize, and that's creating more business opportunity, I think is what they're looking at. And there's really a scary opportunity for big business jump in and make this a completely different game. And I think we're forgetting about that. Some of the schedule changes for making it the equivalent to heroin, and now taking it down to a Schedule 3 is not near far enough. But what it does do is it opens up opportunities to go back and correct those legal wrongs. And until you correct those, I think you're still on a kind of unstable platform. So we have to go back and kind of fix the wrongs of the industry first as we grow the industry up forward.
That is, Chuck, that's amazing. It is intricate and it's complicated. There's so many pieces of it, right? And so we have to look at the banking system, because I'm a former banker. So you've got all sorts of things with anti-money laundering. And so you have to look at cannabis and say, not only do you have to look at the descheduling of it from a Schedule 1, but we have to fix the banking system so that so much of your money isn't charged in tax, so that as a cannabis business, you're able to take those 280E deductions just like any other business. A cannabis business should have been able to apply for the paycheck protection loan, the EIDL loan. You should be able to get things from the SBA. So it is a business that should be regulated like any other business in commerce. So we got to look at things under the Commerce Clause. Looking at the schedule, it is not enough to say we just want to declassify and deschedule. When you have people whose lives have been virtually ruined in all 50 states by the war on drugs, there's just not been enough recompense. How do you go back and give somebody their life that was locked up for 20 years? And even when we look at cannabis social equity and the few programs that we have, no one has a program that's working well. No one from Illinois to New York that recently has litigation that has struck their program because they have veterans preference, but then they didn't honor that, has been able to say, how are these dollars, whether they are in a cannabis business, whether they are ancillary businesses, is going to go back and make whole your institutional Black churches, your NAACPs, these nuclear organizations that had to raise these families when you incarcerated mothers and children, when you called Black women in the 80s crack whores, right? When you lock these families up, where's that 40 years of recompense that is owed to rebuild those communities that have been decimated, and destroyed and gentrified. And you can't have that conversation without talking about gentrification, because today those communities in a lot of cities like Seattle, they do not exist. So how do you fix that as part of what you want to restructure? And then when we talk about MSOs, I mean, again, looking at it from an economic impact, you have to be honest. When you have Altria, which was doing business as RJ Reynolds and Philip Morris. And how do I know that? Because it was our law firm in Jacksonville that sued them for big tobacco. And I'm going to drop something in the chat. They are now making the play in the cannabis business to the tunes of billions of dollars. So what are they going to do? They're going to come in as your MSOs, and they're going to do the opposite, Laura and Chuck, of what you're talking about. Instead of having these cannabis social equity stores or these businesses like some of the folks on this call that have had the opportunity in 10 years to own their business, they're going to come in and bastardize the industry, because what they're really looking for is to become the CVS or the Total Wines on the corner. And they're going to deprive those people who've had the skin in the game, that have lost their livelihood. So by the time you get your social equity license, or by the time you do some of the stuff, Caitlin, that you want to do, it will have no value. And so before we can go in and look at MSOs or look at out-of-state capital, we have to first invest where we have created harm and heal those people, whether you are a woman who is a lesbian, whether you are a veteran, whether you are indigenous, AAPI, or Black. We have to give those new entrants an opportunity to be successful into the market and invest in the people that are already operating here before we bring in those MSOs and allow them to further saturate the market, water it down, and then no one's making any money. It is a banking problem. So read that article that I just put in here, because I'm reading everything from Forbes. What you really have are big cigarettes who already have all of the market shelves in all of your stores. They're going to replace their e-vapes and their e-cigarettes with cannabis products. And then a lot of these smaller, more boutique, more niche cannabis stores aren't going to make any money. So we need to keep them the hell out. Next.
I like it. Okay. Keep this
Yeah.
okay.
I'm with it and I'm for it and I see it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's interesting, because I've been reflecting lately on how not all MSOs are created equal, right? We're now starting to see, especially with this conversation about rescheduling, that early excitement of independent owner operators, local markets, what we remember from the legacy market, which was neighborhood based for the most part. And MSOs were this big bad. And when we were talking about MSOs, we were talking folks who are in 2 or 3 different states. What we're now talking about is not 2 or 3 different states. We're talking about our international conglomerations. And we are all dead in the water. Anybody that was here in these early days are dead in the water as soon as those have entrance into this conversation. And we're right there at the threshold waiting, right? This whole Schedule 3 conversation is all about exactly that.
And they're funding it.
Now,
they're funding it.
Yeah, 100%. And however, I think a new thing that I feel has been introduced, and that's a little bit different from this unique Washington conversation around out-of-state ownership. So that's not what I'm talking about here. But I think some MSOs that are homegrown, that have gone from one state and moved to the next and then to the next, actually can be an interesting intermediary for giving voice to these more independent owner-operator folks, so that we can say, look, we can actually build a network that doesn't need these large conglomerations to lead this conversation. We are capable of continuing to build this from the ground up, as we have done in these states like Washington, which are a little bit more mature. I think things like, we were a part of passing the interstate commerce bill here in Washington state in preparation. Oregon passed it a few years ago, and California the year before us, getting together with states so that we can start to build interstate commerce compacts amongst adult use states, so that, again, we can almost grassroots start to build these networks without consultation of these large conglomerations. Actually might be a path forward to continue this work that we've been doing and continue the benefit in the yards of the folks that have been at this for a decade and plus.
Love it.
The community already exists. We don't need the corporate. It's like, they've had the community hidden, and then it's like, no, we're not. Now they're like, oh, let's get a part of it. We're like, no, we got this.
And I think what's concerning, a lot of you asked about legislative attitudes. What's concerning me the most is the legislative attitude that larger corporations are easier to deal with. They come with more money. And so there seems to be an appetite on the behalf of lawmakers for all of us smaller, scrappier folks to go away so that they can just have one conversation. And we need to call that out, especially here in Washington. We're about to start an election cycle. I know it's 18 months, but people are already talking, right? Really start to call that out and make legislators answer for who are they listening to? What money is coming their way? Again, especially in light of the Schedule 3. And we're talking not just about the Philip Morris's, but also the Mercks and pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah,
there's my bad.
There's no need. Yeah.
Oh, my fault. So like in the industry, we're already seeing consolidation. We've seen that happen significantly. We've seen a lot of small farms shutter. We've seen excuse my language. We've seen a lot of big farms shutter because of, money and big business. And we would also be lying to ourselves if we didn't say there are probably already out of state, people coming in that have invested in different businesses here in Washington State in cannabis. And so I think one of the things that we did get right in Washington State is you see a lot of more mom and pop shops that are in Washington State that are on the growing side, on the retail side. It's not traditional in a lot of other states, but the one thing that's hindering us is our canopy grow. A lot of other states, have unlimited amounts of type. And if you allow that interstate commerce, a lot of the states that can grow unlimited, they'll have definitely an advantage of that. Like Oregon has unlimited, Oklahoma, all these other places. And then the other piece too is I'm looking at the aspect if we look at climate change. And so a lot of the farmers that are in Washington State, like Washington State's going to become potentially like the new place where a lot of agriculture and stuff is going to continue to grow because of what's happening in California and other states across the country. And so we know that Washington State can be potentially one of the leaders in producing a lot of the cannabis. Like we produce the most hops in the entire country. We produce 60% of the hops that are in the entire country. And a lot of the food that we're bringing up, it's grown in the Yakima Valley. It's becoming more and more about how we're growing stuff. And so anyways, long story short is I think, we have to get it right here first. We don't even have vertical integration. You got to sell cannabis to a retail store for an eighth for $5 to $8, and they're marking it up, and our taxes are the highest in the country at 37%. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to really fix here before we can allow out-of-state money and investors to come in and hike up and do the CVS model that they want to do or Costco model.
And Joy, we've tried to get vertical integration, and the truth of the matter is we've got one massive association that's been fighting that, and that's WACA. And with growing to cannabis space, I mean, we've pulled data from the LCB, and I'd say reach out to Rebecca Smith, because what we've always been told is a lot of people aren't even growing to their canopy space. If that data is different, I would love for David Postman and the LCB to tell us that, because we've always been told tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3s are not growing to their maximum canopy space now. We don't want to have a bunch of unlimited stores like Oregon, because again, we don't want people flooding the backdoor market. You don't want a bunch of product, because nothing hurts retail stores like cannabis being sold illegally on the street. So you do want to have some control and regulation of that. We've all seen, a couple of years ago, the FBI sweeps, and people are getting caught up into that. So you want to be able to regulate what's sold. You want it to go through the regulated market. There's a home grow bill that the LCB is circulating now, right? So there's going to be some opportunities to expand home grow for medicinal patients. And so I agree with you. Do I think vertical integration would be great? I think it would be awesome. I think it's silly not to do it because there's too many other industries that are vertically integrated, but we don't have 25 and 54. We don't have 25 votes for it in the Senate, 54 votes for it in the House because of what Caitlin said. It's the palms that they grease. And so I would be interested to have the LCB provide us the data of all of the licensees they have now, 1,400 and something. How many of those licensees are growing to their full canopy space now? In 5080, which we'll get into that LOTA, we have 100 additional licenses, and I don't remember off the top of my head the way we break down, but we're going to have more producer/processor licenses coming online. And what we keep hearing from like I said, folks at WACA, is that we have too much product out there, right? So we don't want to flood the market, but we want to make sure that you can get a good price for your product per gram, but it has a home that it can go to and be sold, so that you're making a good price for your retail store.
Oh, completely agree. If we had a social equity program that allowed people to vertically grow, if they were social equity applicants, that to me is like completely true social equity. And we've talked about that, because then they could be able to grow it, sell it, and
And
distribute.
maybe, Joy, you only do it for the social equity licenses. You don't do it for because what you, and I love what you're saying there, because what you need to do, and back to what Laura and Chuck and everybody was saying, right? You got to give those folks that have been harmed the opportunity to catch up. So if I'm a Black producer processor, and we know this because we've tested this with folks like Joy and other folks, they want to buy from the Black producer processor and they want to sell that in the Black-owned retail store. And so I think it is disingenuous to say that if you grow it, you should not also be able to have a license for a retail store and sell it in your store. We know that when we have gone out and spoken to a community, if we're just going to be honest, that's what the community wants. If we're being truthful, that's what community wants to be able to do.
Absolutely. And in being honest, I mean, I don't think our regulation has stopped backdooring or illicit market sales, right? Like in the state at all. It hasn't happened. And so maybe we need to find a way that these people can get their products to those same customers a lot easier, right? Because it's about the price point, even though we have the highest tax, we have the lowest price per eighth in the nation, but it's still too high for some consumers out there, which makes them want to go back to the illicit market because the homie hookup is always going to be the homie hookup, you know? And so let's make their homies some of those larger processors because they have the skill set. They have the desire to be within the industry. They just maybe don't have the backing from the folks with money to get into the industry or access, you know, through licenses.
Well, what we should be looking at is when we look at the taxes that Washington has made since I-502 passed, we should be lowering the tax, in my humble opinion, on everybody that has a retail store, but especially on the social equity stores. They should not be paying that ridiculous mammoth tax, right? It makes the margins in the industry for the retail stores too small. So one of the things that we're talking about in the interim right now with lawmakers is maybe running some type of legislation to lower that on your social equity stores so that they can increase their profit margins. But I would be willing, even on existing retailers, for everybody to just like because of COVID and the different impacts and how people have been impacted, to give everybody like a 2 to 3 year window, like for the window of social equity, they give all retailers that exemption to say, can we take 10 or 15% off the taxation? Because even if you are an existing retailer and you don't have a social equity store, haven't you been harmed by COVID and hasn't your business suffered? Because we've seen a cooling of sales. So, and those dollars, whether they're doing the last prisoner reform and some of the other products where they're putting money back into the community and hiring, and they're paying more than $25 an hour and providing benefits, doesn't everybody generating a Washington business deserve to benefit from a tax break? And so these are things that I think are low-hanging fruit where you could take existing retailers instead of creating competition between them and social equity stores. These are things that we can do that brings everybody together and everybody can benefit. Like lower the tax on everybody, and maybe you give an extra 5% to the social equity stores. The hell, give it to the existing retailer too. He's creating business. Like we got to start thinking out of the box and stop pitting people against each other, I guess is what I'm saying.
You know, that may also stabilize that economy, in that if you give these people a chance to get their foothold, hire, most of these, especially community-owned dispensaries, they're hiring from the community, they're supporting the community, they're more community-minded than most pharmacies nowadays. But if you allow these people to get a foothold in the community, establish themselves, survive over that first 2 to 3 year bump, which is going to be hard. COVID's hurt everybody, but you allow them to get their foothold, that community will be very strong, all of them together. So I totally agree with you. I think that's a really strong point.
Okay. Well, that moves us into the next question nicely. And so we know what the statistics are about the ownership within the Washington state cannabis industry and really the national cannabis industry, right? So what can we do as entrepreneurs to take back or create our hold on the community and culture of cannabis, right? Because we're all speaking about how it means so much to us. What can we do to take that back from what exists right now?
I think they need to go back and hire within. They need to go and like find the growers, and like those are the ones that are educated. They have decades of knowledge, and then they just want to go, they're just used by the corporate people. Oh, start this, and then we're using your brain, and then they get rid of them. That's not fair. It's the people that don't have any knowledge are using all of the, just the decades of people that have done it, for the right reasons for themselves. And then now they're like, okay, now we're going to need you, but we're going to give you this money. And then it's like, oh, thanks, we don't need you anymore. Well, that's not, what are they supposed to do now? You just stole all their knowledge because you want to capitalize off something, and it's not okay at all.
And I'm going to say something, I don't know if it'll be popular on this call, but I would invite everybody to just think about it, right? Look at the complexity and the diversity that's on this call. And I've been saying this, if you go back to 2870, 1443, and 5080, I've been consistent. We are talking about out-of-state capital, and I'll tell you why I'm not for it and why I don't think we need it. We have billions of dollars in the cannabis industry and in Washington State. What we have is a lack of innovation and intelligence. If you take people that have cannabis retail stores now, one of the reasons I think they fought against social equity and tried to kill the bill is because of a scarcity mentality. And it's the old adage of, oh, they're coming for us. Well, we're not coming for you. You're fucking rich and you've made all of the money. What I've said is where people are capped at 5 licenses on their ownership, if you allow them to say to go up to 10 doesn't mean you get 49% of somebody's license. It doesn't mean that you get 10 or 15%. You can cap those folks and say you can't own more than 5 or 10%. So the minority person, whether she's a woman, indigenous, LGBTQI place, whatever she is, you're capped at 10%. But what do you get for that 10%? Investment. You can take some of those billions and millions that you have made and you can invest in social equity, and we'll let you do that times 5 more licenses so you can grow, but you will never be in a position either through the operating agreement or to be able to come in and to take, 51% of their license. So the person that has the social equity licenses will always own 90% of their license, but take some of this in-state investment money that we have and say, hey, existing retailers, so you're not backdooring us and trying to do, this backdoor crap that we know you're trying to do. What if we were transparent in the light of day and said, hey, we're going to allow social equity people to have 5 licenses like we did under 5052 instead of 1. And if they want to partner with an existing retailer who has cash to invest in their business, because that's going to be the big thing. So we don't go getting the Altrias and these other people. So we can have, like Caitlin said, these boutique niche people in here. Go to like Chuck and Laura, who might know to somebody, go to decent, honest people, and then they can become your investor at a maximum. They can't ever own more than 10% of your license. And then once we try that model, if we then see we need out-of-state money, then we can take a look at it. But there are a lot of retailers that are good, that have been around, that have made a lot of money, that would invest in these licenses, but they're already capped at their 5. And what we're doing is we're setting up people to do this, because we may not like that it's this person, or we may not like that. Take that out of it. Like ain't got nothing to do with it. What did Clint Eastwood say? If he's got money and he can do business and people can make their own decisions, we don't tell Chick-fil-A who they can invest in. Let people get their lawyers and vet it, but open that thing up and say, social equity person can have 5 licenses, existing retailer will let you go on another one. You're maxed out now at 10, but then together those people own 15 stores. And so I don't need you to be the CVS, because now you've got 15 or whatever, right? You might have 15 Bakersmen Collectives or whatever you want to call them as your business, but that's in-state investment. And then if you guys feel like in 2 to 3 years, you're capped and can't grow because we're doing the interstate commerce and you want to be able to do business with California, you want to be able to do business with Oregon, then let's have an honest conversation about, hey, we're at 250 million, Paula, we could become $1 billion conglomerate. Now we need some out-of-state money because we have now tapped out all of the in-state resources. I think we're not being smart about it because we're looking at boxes and people of color, and we don't want to look at that. Well, we need to be looking at this as a business model and say what from a business vantage point makes sense. And to me, I'm like, there are some really good people in the existing market. There are good retailers that behind the scenes have supported equity. Not everybody's trying to kill the bills, but they're afraid to open up their mouth for being called racist, or they're afraid to open up their mouth because people are going to think they're trying to steal the license. That if we were just talking about this honestly, like we're doing now in the light of day, they would come to the table and say, how do we pass that bill and get that proposal done without me getting attacked because people think I'm trying to steal equity, where you're not if you cap them at 10%. That's what I'm thinking.
I was so excited to hear you talk, Paula, because it's exactly these kinds of things, sort of innovative capital markets, but that also needs to go hand in hand just in general with infrastructure. I talked about building this thing that we've not seen before, and these are exactly the kinds of things that I'm talking about. So that's on that market side, or that the capital market side. That also speaks to all aspects of business, like logistics, contract development, all of those kinds of things. We need better support for all of that. And frankly, it's hard sometimes to remember because those of us that have been in it for the last decade, it feels like 100 years, not only 10 years. But our regulatory system still is brand new and it has lots and lots of problems. Things like we talked about canopy, we talked about 2-lane sales is what I like to call it, 502 and 503. And just when you have an unregulated market functioning healthfully alongside the regulated market, what we see then is that enforcement mirrors all of the systemic racism that we have seen all along, where again, wealthy white owners are not being enforced upon, and the infractions that are being set out are inequitable as well. And so we also have to attend to that infrastructure. And I think we can chew gum and walk at the same time. Like you said, Paula, I think there are lots of people who would be behind this.
All right. That was thoroughly answered by everyone involved. And on that note, what role can cannabis businesses play in supporting the community initiatives and social responsibility advocacy efforts that you've seen out there? Like, I know that was part of the social equity license application in the recent bill that passed, and in that process, you had to state what your social equity plan was. But how can we kind of spread that amongst the industry more so than just those applicants?
Are you asking how to like get it more into the community with the businesses as far as?
Yeah, so I think that there's sort of a disconnect at times between the businesses that exist and finding the community that they want to be with, right? So what ways can we encourage them or suggest that they engage with the community around them that foster the connections we actually want to see within the industry?
Well, I'm going to take an example from something a Cannamom friend of mine did. She and her husband are both on a city council in Davis, California. Her husband is actually currently the mayor. And they were kind of, I can't think of the right word, but they helped organize how to get a lot of the dispensaries in Davis. Some of their money that they donate, it goes towards First 5 California, which goes towards schools and whatnot. So they're like giving back directly to the communities, seeing that. And that was just, she was really instrumental in that. And I was just really excited about that for her. So that was, when she told me that, I was just really impressed. Excuse me. Because, I think there's dispensaries, the businesses, they're happy to give back. They're, we're the ones that want to be in the community and whatnot. It's like we're trying to be the ones that are like, no, this is it can be a family thing. And so just putting more resources out there in the community that way. I'm just taking her example, but I just love that was something that they did.
And we just have to speak that you're in California, so your efforts are a little bit easier than what we have here in Washington. To engage with the community, like in my experience working in dispensaries right now, the recent change of and I guess not change, but the crackdown by the Liquor and Cannabis Board about what your tabling displays not being over $30 in value. What we saw was the marketing efforts, right, that happened in the shop. They decrease, right? The company, I have not seen as many vendor days in my dispensary as a result of that. And when they try to, they're very cautious and careful about what they're putting out. But what I see from customers when we have an amazing marketing display where they can offer things is engagement with the brand, right? So these policies that we have within the state of Washington kind of limit the actions that businesses would take. Like I get asked for matches all the time, but in a retail shop, we're not allowed to give anything away for free. Not a single thing.
But
right?
I would say a lot of think out of the box, and I definitely don't want to put her on the spot, but we many years ago we partnered with Joy on some feeding insecurity stuff. Today we feed 3,000 families. We have probably received over $3 million in grants. And this was stuff that she was doing when I first met her. She was with another program, but it was like she had Hollingsworth cannabis and Hollingsworth hemp. And so it wasn't that she was using like her cannabis brand. as much as she was using her time and her resources and what she knew. And that's another way that you can help, right? And so we've been able to partner with some other folks, like in Vancouver. We've won 2 awards from the Vancouver School District, but we now feed 250 soldiers on a military base. We feed 700 unhoused kids in the Tacoma Bethel School District. We feed 250 children with one of the largest cannabis providers, who doesn't like to name them, but they provide a lot of resources for that Vancouver Clark County School District. And we were kind of doing this on a smaller scale, but just partnering with Joy, like teaching us how to think big. And so what I would say to different cannabis providers is, it doesn't always have to be your time in your space. Like, she had a warehouse at the time and would let us stage from that. It's using different resources to get around that. And so working with 112 of the social equity applicants, I have read some of the best plans in the world. And this was what I think people should do. So the Liquor and Cannabis Board under 5080, they're going to waive that renewal fee for existing retailers if they submit a social equity plan. I think that they should do the stuff, like I said, that Joy's been doing for 4 or 5 years, using her platform to lift the message of food insecurity and how that disproportionately impacts BIPOC people. They should be using their resources, if not their stores and their space, to get around the advertising. But how can you use your time and your awareness if it's something you care about? Last Prisoner Project, affordable housing. We've done things around sexual assault with some of these cannabis retailers. Like, what is your personal story? How can you share education? Like, we work with Caitlin on that, providing education and technical assistance to smaller licensees who don't have access to education and resources, especially like the little itty bitty tier ones. She's helped me with some of those, and they're Black and they're in Tacoma. So it's different ways that you can use your time and your talent to be of help that has that impact in community. Like I said, the partnership that we created with Joy like years and years ago, the impact is over 1 million pounds of food, 3,000 families, Cowlitz County, Pierce County, King County, and Clark. And that's attributable to a relationship that we started with her in 2020. And so we are going to always give credit and praise where credit and praise is due. And that was something that she started under her Hollingsworth brand when nobody was paying attention. So that's just small things that people are able to do, and they should be doing. And Joy, you should be talking more about that, because that has changed people's lives.
Oh, thank you, Paula. But the key to that was also like, okay, we had that as like the farm and understanding like the food piece. And then Paula and her team and FMS Global Strategies knew how to navigate government, knew how to navigate grants, knew how like the connections, right? And so like we could be able to jump skip all of what you have to do to building relationships, right? To be able to form this partnership and be able to like have a immediate impact, especially around the pandemic, which was really obviously important because we saw a lot of people that were struggling who looked like us, who didn't have the access to food banks. And so we just took our knowledge of food, understanding our distribution, logistics, warehouse, relationships that we had in the community, and then partnered with the FMS Global, who had government relations, who knew how to navigate grants, who knew how to, had the legislators and had that piece as well. And then that just worked for us. And I think I would love to see more of that in our community, but there's only one Black lobbyist in the state who is probably thinking about that type of piece, and how to impact community. People can also figure out like the Bakers Collective, right? Like you should be getting money to be able to put on this event from the state through a social equity program, because this creates a front porch for people to access more information. The biggest thing is exposure. A lot of people hit you up and they're like, I just don't even know how, right? I can't begin to tell you how many emails Paula probably gets. Like, hey, I just don't even know the first step to take. And a lot of times it's like, okay, we spent so much time bringing people to our farm and being like, hey, and then it gets them ideas and they're like, okay, this is how I can fit in. This is how I can navigate. But a part of that is just exposure. People don't even know where to start. And I think that's really a big thing. We think we have to come up with these grandiose ideas when it's like, hey, they just need a exposure to something to figure out to get their innovative ideas created. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, well, and I have sort of two thoughts. One is that's exactly where the Cannabis Alliance is moving into, is putting people together in these ways and helping build standard operating procedures, right? SOPs for people to be able to create things like this. And Paula and Joy, your example is wonderful, which sort of leads me into the second part. And I appreciate the statistics, Paula, because I think one of the things that I would love to see LCB do with the social equity plans that's not in there yet, and that is accountability. So not just the plan, but then revisiting it and doing assessment. Did this plan work? Did you do what you said you were going to do? And that's for all licensees. Did you actually meet any of those goals? And if not, why not? How do we attend to that? Because I feel like sometimes saying, here's what I want to do for social equity is a great way to feel pretty good. But it's also then necessary to say, well, did you actually do what you said you were going to do? And do have some assessment and accountability for that as well.
And Caitlin, they have a new diversity and equity inclusion manager, because we were kind of like cautious about putting that into 5080, because I was like, is this just going to be a way for retailers to get their fee waived? And they assured us that there would be accountability, that there would be some check-ins to say, okay, you've submitted this plan, ABC cannabis retailer, right? They're going to go back to check to see how did that work, whether, whatever it is they decide to do, right? Like maybe they offer mentoring to a new social equity applicant. Maybe they let you come in and look at their store and see how the RFDI taggings work, or maybe they just mentor you for the 12 months that you have your new business up. They're supposed to have somebody that they can check on. And what I was going to ask you too is, there's an RFI that's out that's got $9 million in it, where they're taking questions. And I know a lot of people have reached out because they don't know what an RFI is and they don't know how to respond to it. Is the Cannabis Alliance offering any mentoring with like new folks, like with Lotta's group? If she has never written, because Joy says she should be getting money, what if Lotta has never responded to an RFI before? Are you guys offering mentoring for people to help with that?
We are, and not only mentoring, we've been putting together some funds for scholarships to hire grant writing assistants for when those community investment grants become available as well. So 2 lanes, we're a grassroots organization. And so sometimes it's hard to marshal things, but this is something we believe in strongly. And this is where we want to put our resources, is to help this move forward in a way that gets us to where we want to go.
Because Joy, I would say that's going to be the biggest thing that these little people that don't have like the 10 years that Joy and her family have to know how to do this, right? Grant writing is hard. And you can be really good and not get the money. And so if there is, and not just to put everything, Caitlin, on you, like if there's other people that we should be reaching out to, other associations, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to start a cannabis store. We're going to need everybody that has that capacity to help these folks write grants and make sure they can respond to the RFI. Because the intent was to make sure as much of that money go to the licensees as possible. So they need to know how to respond by, off the top of my head, Joyce, the 29th, right? They may need some help responding to that RFI. And it's basically just giving your ideas on how you think Commerce should build a program. And I told people, I said, be selfish, tell them you want the money. And this is how you want to have them spend it. But then I got some emails back and it was so funny. People said, I've never responded to an RFI. Paula, do you have a sample? And I was just like, no. So we need some help. Like we're asking people to do things that haven't had resources, don't have time, haven't had the expertise, but then we're upset that they can't do stuff, right?
Absolutely. And that's the hardest part about this industry as a whole, because it's never existed before. So there are many individuals that don't know how to do what they need to do. And they're running multiple shops, they need SOPs, they need an HR team, they need a lot of support on the back end. And we want to pull more people within the industry that already know how to do that for everything else. Because if you know how to do it well there, you can do it well in cannabis, with wrapping up that conversation about the social equity, can anyone give us maybe a rundown on the differences between the new licenses that are coming online and the process that is wrapping and coming to its end right now? Something that maybe those that watch this webinar later on should know, because if I remember correctly, they go online in January-ish.
Don't kill us. We did the best we could. So this is what I will say. The licenses that are out, the 46, are under House Bill 2870. We'll drop the link in the chat if you haven't read that. Those are the licenses that were canceled, revoked, never issued. They're specific. You are tagged to a county, right? And they also have certificate holders. And so there's over 462 people that applied and were scored for those licenses. And I would just say transparently, there will always be more licenses, more applicants than licenses. The LCB will have an update on the 13th of September. We are encouraging all community members, whether you applied or not, to go to that meeting. You can also submit your questions to the social equity portal with the LCB. That's the best place to get your questions answered. It also makes all questions and all answers public. So it's a matter of public record. That way, everybody gets the same stuff. Nobody's getting any inside intel. I tell people, I don't know nothing. Don't call me, please, because I'm gonna tell you, I don't know nothing about nothing. So that's those licenses, they will go out. So what will happen in between that? Yes, because people are calling me. I was like, girl, I do not know your score. Do not call me. I will not respond. So that will go out, and then, just transparently, the process is what the process is. People get upset. There will be a debrief, a comment session, and then there will be community feedback. Because anytime the LCB has done anything, and Joy knows we've lived through this, we've said you have to go back out to the BIPOC community. You have to have a listening session. You got to take that incoming on what you did wrong, what you could do better, and how do you improve the process. And you've got to allow for that to take maybe a 3 to 6 month window. Under 5080, understanding the process, they'll have to gather all of that, because you can't put 52 more licenses out unless you know what did and didn't work under this. So there's a process called WAC, and Caitlin knows what that is. So they will have to put out a notice that we're going to create WACs. They will have to allow public comment. Everyone gets to say what I like, what I didn't like. They have to take that under advisement. There has to be votes. Then they have to issue those WAC rules. They have to do this publicly. Once that happens, and then you have the period that the WAC has to be out there, then they will notice everybody, and the window, like they did under these 46, will open to take licenses. Now, we know government does not churn anything fast. This is me. Again, I don't have any inside data. I can't imagine, with us being at the 9th of September and them holding a meeting on the 13th, that we know realistically it takes about a year to open up a retail store. The hardest thing is finding a location and getting capital. And this is not me trying to poo-poo anybody's anything. Would it make sense to push out 52 more licenses before those 46 stores stand up? No. So I told people there is slim to no chance those licenses will open up in January. And right now, Slim's on vacation, so that just leaves none. You got to stand those stores up. You got to let those people get locations, be functioning, because then you are, and again, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, you would be oversaturating the market. That wouldn't be fair, right? Why would you push out more stores? And the problem with 5080, or the challenge is, under 5080, you can put a store anywhere. You don't have the boundary constraints that you have under 2870. So if I'm one of the people that wins a license in King County, hell no, I don't want 52 more people that can go anywhere coming in, while I might still be 6 months from now looking for a location and negotiating my lease. So these are the things that the LCB in these listening sessions, both from existing retailers, 46 people that just got licenses, and people coming online when they do listing sessions, they're going to have to listen to that and process. If I just got my license, hell no, I don't want you other 52 people nipping at my heels. Can I open up my store and sell some of my cannabis? We have to just woosah and say what makes sense, because what you really want for equity is viability. It wouldn't make those 46 licenses very viable. So the reason that we extended the program for 10 years, and it goes like Joy for what, to 30 or 31, is because the intent, and we've been transparent, but I get the feeling that no one was listening, was to always to release the licenses in stages. We never said the licenses were coming out in 2024. We said that would be the first time the window would be open for the licenses. So what I'm saying here, because this is going to get out, that's when the window opens. That don't mean that's when the licenses open. Let the 46 that are going out open and stand up and be viable before we flood the market with more, and let the LCB get the feedback as to what worked, what didn't work. We're still facing jurisdictional caps. Renton has got allotments they're not opening. Federal Way has allotments. Kent has allotments. Like, there's still legislative mess that we're dealing with. Pasco just lifted their thing. We're working with that. We're still working with Linwood. So there's stuff that I know won't make sense to people that's probably not Caitlin and Laura and Joy. Like, we understand what Paula's saying. I know the regular person doesn't. But in order for us to make your opportunities as best we can get it, we legislatively need to do some other stuff. And 2024 would be too soon for us to make these opportunities really good, is what I'm saying.
Well, there you have it, everybody. If you're wondering, that was a succinct summary of what's going on. I think we've covered so much in this conversation, and I thank you all for being here. I would love to close this panel out with a question that everyone can answer and that our viewers find informative, right? So it's pretty easy, but how can we bridge the gap between scientific findings and public understanding of cannabis, right? Because even the legislative stuff is so complicated, but there's just the science that I find that hasn't hit everyone. So I know we got a doctor in the building. Let's just all give them an answer.
You know, it's an incredible time for the science coming through. You know, I've practiced primary care medicine, hospital medicine for most of my time. But I've gotten really interested in psychiatry recently. I'm actually involved in a fellowship now, so I'm doing some additional training. Cannabis has a long history, and has a long history of people using it for medications. And so I think we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that is really, really fascinating to follow. But now we're actually getting some research coming out of large universities like UC Irvine, UC San Diego, at least to name some, here in Southern California. So we're actually starting to look at and put some truth behind some things that we've known for a very long time. But I think what has to happen is there has to be a dialogue about what these things are. Going back to anecdotal evidence, a lot of times patients have the best information for you forever, because I think for a long time, we've really not gotten an honest answer from people on cannabis use. It's very common medication. It's used all the time. It's becoming more popular now. But I think from the medical community, we've always asked the question wrong. And I do training too. I teach new doctors. But one of the things is when you're asking the question, you know, a lot of people pose it as a very negative thing. It has this negative connotation. It's just negative, negative, negative from the start. And it needs to be spun around, and we need to treat it as something that's an option people might choose as medication and get what their experiences out of it. We can share the data we have now, but it's patchy. We're missing a lot of things, and so we can fill the gaps of that with having that discussion. But the discussions are being had now, and I think that's the important time. Is create part of the dialogue, hear what people's experiences have been, particularly in mental health, in pain, in substance abuse history. There's incredible medication use out there. So how do we have that dialogue among the medical community? Now, there's twofold there. One, it has to happen between patient and physician. That's a very personal thing, and I think when you get comfortable with somebody, you can have great conversations. But in the medical community itself, it's a terrible communication. Some doctors get it. Some doctors are open. They've got history. They've listened to patients. They know some experience. And some people are just so walled off that they'll just never hear it. I'll give a very quick, brief discussion of my first introduction to cannabis. I was at a big medical lecture in Southern California, probably 300 doctors. A phenomenal doctor from a local big trauma center came up and gave a talk on pediatric seizures. Showed pictures of this poor child, beautiful little girl, uncontrollable seizures in the home, had to be hospitalized most of the time, couldn't be involved in school. And it was her story about how they got this young lady to be more functional. And he goes through it. And by the end of this conversation, it's an ER doctor. He's the trauma doctor that's giving the speech, who's very well renowned. And it's his daughter that he walked through. And after going everywhere to Harvard, MIT, Mayo Clinic, everywhere to get his daughter the best treatment, he couldn't find anything. He came home, started talking to community folks that know about cannabis, started getting into it, found a solution, got her controlled enough that she could attend school with cannabis. Opened my eyes up to everything. That room of 350 people, these are high-level doctors. I tell you, had so many open eyes, open mouths to see somebody who's everybody's so respected, and then you realize their journey with cannabis was just unbelievable. So
It's about time.
Yeah.
And I'll build on that. I have a teenager with Lennox-Gastaut, which is a treatment-resistant form of epilepsy, and he's managed with cannabis. And what you said is exactly right. You know, I come from a qualitative research background, and medicine doesn't necessarily care for qualitative research, but I think what we need to do is actually reverse engineer from the knowledge of patients, from these qualitative stories. The community knows what it's talking about. They just don't have the medical language to describe it. And so I think it's now up to the medical community to learn the qualitative language of the community and from patients, and then find the more quantitative ways of describing that exact same data. Our neurologist, you know, after we have gone through all of the typical treatment plans, he has unmedicated up to 100 plus seizures a day. Medicated, we've got it down to maybe 20 to 30 or so. And, you know, we're still learning, but when I went to the neurologist and said, you know, where would you like for us to start? She turned and looked at me and she goes, you're the expert. Tell me what you find out. And that was really unsettling. I'm not going to lie. And thankfully, I have access to all of the people who know exactly what they're doing with generations of knowledge and, lots of patients that they work with on a one-on-one basis. But I'm in a really I'm on a panel like this, right?
Yeah.
That's not the typical experience of most folks. And so just continuing to build that strength of community and I mean, doctor, you tell me, reassure physicians, allelopathic physicians in particular, that cannabis is not dangerous. It's not scary. You are not going to get sued. And you're not, there's a lot of fear amongst, in particular, allelopathic physicians.
I'm so glad you said that because it's a huge fear. And so what I see most of the time is physicians put a wall and they just won't ask. We don't want to know. And then it comes up in their screen or their test, and then they're in trouble and have to have this word discussion. So I opened up a discussion among anesthesiologists in my community. I have a hospital affiliation that I work with, and pain specialists and neurologists in the community, because I wanted to have that dialogue openly. It's like, how are you going to handle this? Because if we're handling it as a community, then we're handling it the same, and the community standard is that. And I was so amazed, the neurologists, the anesthesiologists, the pain doctors, all agreed, no, cannabis is not a concern. Cannabis, if anything, is probably augmenting the medications we're using. It's helping people get off. It's a line item they don't even look at in the toxicology screen. So it was really interesting to see that when you bring it to the forefront of people to say, okay, I know you're uncomfortable with the discussion, let's make a decision. What would you do if this came up positive? Then people had to make that decision. And there's growing evidence in that. And I think we're going to see so much more of it. That if we have that dialogue among physicians, particularly younger physicians that are very algorithmic in their thinking sometimes, to open themselves up to something, have that discussion, see where somebody's at with it. Otherwise, they just won't tell you. You won't find out. You'll never know. And some people are more comfortable with that, but I think we're missing a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and we've been looking in particular around the opioid epidemic and fentanyl deaths and the relationship between cannabis and exiting reliance on opiates. And actually, we have a webinar, I'm going to plug that really quickly, on Wednesday at noon, with some research of folks who were able to anonymize data, patient data, and correlate that with point of sale of cannabis purchases, and showed a 30% reduction in opioid use for people who started using cannabis, and in some cases completely coming off of opioid use. I've been going through statistics in preparation for this, and despite the fact that the alarm was sounded over a decade ago, the line graph of fentanyl death and opioid addiction identification is skyrocketing. It's going up at a higher rate, and it is continuing to going up. There is no mitigation here at all whatsoever. And I really do believe that cannabis in particular is going to be a powerful tool of getting us out of this trajectory. But again, we have to be comfortable talking about it, and physicians have to be not afraid. And again, that the data is there. It just needs to be described in a way that the traditional scientific community can hear it.
And I'd love to say if we had more doctors like Dr. Chuck, that'd be great. Because I'm telling you, I've sat through a lot of these like meetings with doctors or community meetings and substance people that are, substance use disorders, like people that are like social workers, and they talk about cannabis as a gateway drug, and that's how they talk about it. And I think that's what like the stigma around it, because I've seen it medically impact. My uncle replaced 3 prescription drugs. My mom go from a opioid, intake for her back to damn near nothing. She smokes a lot, but that's okay. And so it's perfect. But so I think as we can like destigmatize that, because it is helping folks, I think is really key in this conversation, because I have seen it completely change lives. And even during the pandemic, do you know people were popping edibles for anxiety just to calm down, and what that's done? I think it was huge. I've been on Skid Row. I go to Skid Row once a quarter. I've been down there where, and this is California, y'all have lax laws, where they had cannabis companies give out cannabis on Skid Row. And it helped people significantly with the anxiety and the stress being, experiencing homelessness on Skid Row. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there. It's not scientific talk, but it's just a personal experience.
No, I mean, it's...
Well, but I think it's that... Oh, sorry, Lotta. We're probably going to say the same thing. It's that qualitative data that is not science as, traditional, but it is important and it's not unique. That is a story that is common around the United States.
And I would say, Caitlin and Dr. Chuck, one of the things we've talked about is on the next cannabis bill, no matter what it is, as long as it's germane, is to tag an appropriation or put a fiscal in there for research. Have that money probably go to either WSDA or the Department of Commerce to then end up going back out in some form of an RFP as a grant that you guys can apply for. Because we're getting so much money. It's just like any of the other buckets that we tag, right? We've got to start putting money in there. Like we appropriate money for law enforcement, we appropriate money for education, for prevention. We've got to plus up the box for research in there and then have them put that money out as an RFP so that you guys can apply for it and use those dollars to do exactly what you're saying, whether it is psychedelic or some of the other things, because what it is it is a lack of data, but it's a lack of funding. We've seen that through WSU, we've seen that at UW. So we're talking about finding the next bill that's germane to it and just slipping that in there, Caitlin.
And
I know,
what he was saying,
I'll email you because I have some sponsors for that. And there are doctors in the legislature. They just don't use doctor in their title, but we need to slip that in there so that then that can come out the other end. It can fund what Laura and Chuck is doing. It can fund what you're doing. And then we can have that qualitative research.
Absolutely. As a bud tender that worked during the entire pandemic, I know exactly how much weed I sold to individuals. I mean, they came out of the shop crying, full on freaking out, and we helped them. And so I founded the Bakersmen Collective as a space to bring more people that look like me within the industry in a way that they know how to. So we do social media marketing and creative work, but also to spread things like this, valuable conversations that are being held in spaces that, if you know what you're looking for, are easy to find. But most average consumers don't know what they're looking for when they're trying to get educated on what is happening within the industry. And so I appreciate all of you for being here today and sharing with us. And that's really it for our conversation. So stay baked, everyone.